So, ladies and gentlemen, our final panel of the day is all about the quest for smart and sustainable mobility. But make no mistake, the quest for mobility of that kind is nothing new. If anyone has ever seen the wonderful silent movie by Fritz Lang called Metropolis, which he made nearly 100 years ago in 1927, a large element of that movie is all about the routes and the most effective route of mass public transport through his fictional narrative of the city. And indeed, that poses questions that relate the future of smart mobility intrinsically to the whole concept of urban design. So, in the last few years, we've seen the growing debate as to whether the future of urban design should be to go super tall, or should it be around the 15-minute micro community hub? So for instance, right now, with the amazing project The Line, we're seeing the development, perhaps the ultimate development of the idea of the 15-minute hub. What happens if you put 150 of those next to each other so that you have 150 semi-independent units, each with all services and amenities, education, healthcare, exercise, wholesale delivery, all within 15 minutes of each other. But of course, the whole point of that debate about do we go super tall or do we go 15-minute micro community, the whole point is how do we navigate best around that community? So it's all about smart and sustainable mobility. And I think the conclusions we're going to reach in the next half hour are going to be very significant indeed. So please, let me call up the members of our final panel of the day.
It's obvious why we started late, and it's why not so many of you are with us, because we're obviously all walked here, and people have already left, obviously, to walk back to where they came from, because none of us have cars anymore. And to the gentleman I know who's just stepped out, and we're thinking about the future, I would like to highlight that I work for Atkins, and over the last 6 months, we've actually been doing quite a deep dive on the future of transport. And not just about flying taxis, but genuinely about sort of behavioral issues and some of the key trends that exist and are existing in our world. Panel, thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. So I'll start with Hamid, who's been in the region for quite some time. The question, obviously, everyone has come generally probably by private car. Some may have tried to come by public transport. Sometimes taxis and Kareem are also considered public transport. But we now have a new form of public transport, or transport. It's called working at home. The idea, of course, that now we don't necessarily need to travel in order to actually connect with people. Hamid, just given your experience in the Middle East, what have you seen over these last decades, and what do you see as some of the key challenges in transport moving forward, particularly that public transport, private, and now the work from home dilemma?
Main challenge actually relates to the myths of transportation that exist. Cities are not damaged by the unknown. Cities are damaged by myths. Let me tell you some of the myths. If we have wide sidewalk and great landscape, that is a walkable place. No. I can show you many beautiful sidewalk, wide landscape, no one walks on that. If we have a transit route, then we have a transit-oriented development. Not necessarily. You could have transit route, which basically sucks the captive riders as opposed to take people from their automobile to public transit. Okay, so these are the myths and the cliche that misleads many event planners who are in my field. So let's see then how can we make the cities more walkable and public transit oriented. The telecommuting that you brought, what is it? it brings origin right at the destination. So that is definition of how to eliminate traffic. When origin and destination are far from each other, then you have movement, you have traffic. When origin and destination are on top of each other, like telecommuting, that means no traffic. So the solution to make a place walkable and transit-oriented, it's not necessarily wide sidewalk, although that helps, but that is a catalyst, that's not the cause. It's not transit route, it is bringing origin close to destination. When those two gets closer, then walking becomes possible. If they're far, the most you can do is providing leisure trips, if you're real athletics. It's the same for transit. So the catch that there are myths about it. Many, even in our own field, when they think about making a place transit-oriented, walkable, they think on the supply side, not on the demand side. The most effective thing that you could make these places transit-oriented, pedestrian-friendly, walkable, is bring origin close. How do you do that? Mixed use. When you have mixed use, then as opposed to having enclave of residential here, enclave of commercial here, that separates your origin from this. You gotta bring them together so they mingle together. Then you need grid network, interconnected network. There are two types of different network. We have hierarchy. Hierarchy is local, collector, arterial, highway. These are the wrong things they taught us in traffic engineering book. That, what does it do to the land use, that type of hierarchy? It brings the residential beside the local, brings the commercial right by the interchanges. Well, it separates origin and destination. It causes traffic. It brings you a kilometer longer, you know? So what should be the network also? You should have an interconnected grid network. Examples, London, Paris. You know, when I'm saying grid, that doesn't mean rectangle or square. Irregular could be there. So these are the main elements that has to abide by, and I can talk more about it.
Of course you can, yes. Thank you, Ahmed. Hala, we were talking the other day about your kind of experience in Cairo, and clearly there are challenges. Who decided it should be 15 minutes? Is it not 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Who decided, or what do you think, and why we decided on 15 minutes?
Okay, so yes, in Cairo it's a challenge to have this, of course, the 50-minute concept, but this concept is really important to be implemented, and this should be done from the planning and the design, starting from the planning and the design of the cities. So we need to focus on changing actually the way we used to design cities, first thing. And just to touch upon what has just been said, is that we need to focus on having mixed-use development. We need to have open public spaces and transportation that can help connect better different places. We also need to focus on, for example, using having this in the plan, using also having streets that are accessible for all and walkable streets. This is another important thing. And in hot countries like we live in, the important challenge and consideration that we need also to take into account is the hot climate in all the designs we do. So, for example, using simple concepts and passive techniques in the city, for example, using materials that have high SRIs, having water bodies, having wind catchers, all of these things could help in removing this effect of hot climate. And also in areas where the climate is hot and dry, we can also go for outdoor cooling, where this is applicable, of course. All of this will allow people to really walk and really use this micro-mobility that we want them to use. All of this is important.
And that helps me with a segue onto what does Climatize do in your kind of business? It's an interesting name. Perhaps you want to elaborate on the work that you're doing and what you're doing in that mobility space to encourage greater sustainability.
Sure. So, Climatize, we're a sustainability consultancy. We focus a lot on, the buildings, the master plans, including infrastructure and mobility and the sort. And funny enough, this morning I had a meeting with one of our projects that was a focused workshop on mobility, and I was like, oh, the coincidence. So on that project, and that would give you the idea of this discussion and why is it important to think about smart solutions, sustainable solutions, and the key here is what is sustainability in the realm of mobility and infrastructure. So that project, it's located in Saudi Arabia, and they are actually introducing the 15 minutes concept, locating all of the, it's like a compact, dense master plan that they're doing. And the essence of it, of course, is that you want to have all the services, all the amenities, the residences, the commercial aspects, etc., all within that radius. And then there was a question of, okay, so within that master plan, we have all those 15 minutes, nodes, and then, but how do we connect someone who lives here to some kind of a main event that's there? So that, kind of contradicts the concept of the 15 minutes. And then we started looking at all those different modes of transportation. So there are three main things here. So there's one, which is the digitization, and this is where you start looking at smart solutions such as the autonomous vehicles, the modeling even the pedestrian comfort, the scenarios, etc. And then there is, of course, the electrification, which is where the electric vehicles, electric buses come into place. And then the third one is the autonomous, or more of the virtual reality that is mixed with the digital twin system and us modeling the different scenarios, etc. And what was interesting in that topic is, so they wanted to differentiate between, or they wanted to create the pedestrian cycling mode of transportation to connect to the city, and then they wanted to introduce some kind of a shortcut. And by shortcut is that, so you have that 15 minutes and then like a shortcut smart mobility system, just like you have the loop or whatever, that would connect you to the different other segments of the master plan, but in a smart and sustainable, clean mode of transportation. So in our meeting, we basically start looking at different solutions, what's there that is trending, the innovative products. Mobility as a sector is being transformed day in, day out. It's never constant nowadays. But there's always that challenge, and this is a question that I even said it earlier this morning, which is in Saudi Arabia right now, you're familiar, they're introducing the metro line, right? But the concept of shared transportation is still not widely accepted by the general public. And in this specific project, they wanted to have it as vehicle-free as possible, so they would park their car somewhere, and then you go into this clean city, so you have the electrical, the autonomous, the pedestrian, the cycling, etc., but you don't have any fuel-based vehicles. So my question to them was, if they're already struggling right now, and you're talking about a project that might be coming, sometime in the near future, do they really want to have that struggle of people not wanting to come into the project because they're still not aware of, or they're not accepting the idea of shared transportation? So it's that dilemma.
No, I think it's great to highlight that, as we say, smart mobility is changing. We're clearly not very clear yet what we think the future is going to be. And to the gentleman's point earlier, I think it's a moving feast. I want to come to Vinny now. You were speaking the other day about the challenges, or the very everyday challenges you have around electrification. Perhaps you want to tell the audience a little bit more about what PowerTech does, and more importantly, what are these kind of everyday challenges that you're having around putting up electrical appliances, shall we say, for the cars of the future?
So PowerTech, we are in the region. Next year it'll be 35 years in the country. So we are predominantly a power distribution company. That's how we started. Low voltage switchgear. And in 2017, we are a channel partner of ABB for the last 30 years. And 2017, when the EV push was happening in the UAE, we were approached by ABB to take on this particular product range also, predominantly because UAE, most of the projects, there is always a consultant, that's a contracting way of doing things, right? You cannot, me as an individual, I cannot go and buy a piece of land and install my chargers and do what I want. There is regulations. So we as contractors, electrical contractors, we are approved by ADDC, DEWA, federal government, electricity in Ajman, Ras Al Khaimah. So what we understood initially was this is going to be pretty straightforward because this is going to be the next go-to thing for transportation in the region. But what we have realized in the last 5 years is that it's not a straightforward jump into having an electric car. Me, as an example, I live in Dubai in Business Bay, and it's my own apartment. But if I choose to buy an electric car within my complex, just to install a charger just for my car, it's not possible because then the question arrives, the power is being taken from the common electricity, and who's going to pay for that? How are they going to keep tap of it? It's much more straightforward if you have your own villa. That's how the region is moving. But now a lot of the developers have realized, because there are a lot of new brands coming into the market. So we deal directly with a lot of your OEMs from General Motors, BMW, and Geely. Alphatem is bought in BYD. These are all leading up to EVs becoming a little bit more affordable. But then the big question is, if I am targeting, say, the middle class, who, you're looking at vehicles which is below, say, 100, 120,000 dirhams, then your audience is going to drastically change. They might not always have their own villa. They might be living in a tenanted apartment. Is that facility available? And that's the biggest question, people have when you buy an electric car now. How feasible is it for me? It's not. And to be honest, I don't think so anybody would first go about buying an electric car saying, I'm going to save the planet. That's definitely not the thought process. It's completely like our previous panel said, everything to do with how much money they can save. And if you have an EV, it has to do everything with convenience, especially in a region where the climate is not very friendly for 6 months of the year. Pushing people into public transport, it's not that straightforward because there's not many taxes. Anybody can own a vehicle over here. It's very easy compared to where I'm from in India. Where, there are a lot of taxes, and the government itself rewards you for making that choice, right? So the challenges over here, just on the ground, because I am on the ground, and I can tell you confidently that the government has to make it more appealing for the customers to choose an EV, and that's just the beginning. So once you've done that part, then the infrastructure should support that decision, right? So I would say you have to start initially by rewarding a person in terms of maybe some kind of subsidies, easily accessible charging stations, because Dubai is, UAE as a whole, it's 7 Emirates, and there are a lot of attractions available within an hour's drive, right? So during the weekend, if you are somebody who's spontaneous, you take the car and you want to go, to Ras Al Khaimah. If you have a electric car, you have to really sit and plan a couple of days in advance, right? So and if it's for a petrol, you just go on the way, fill petrol and go. So that's...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's just apparent that we can have lots of process in place and some thoughts about where we want to target, but really if we don't have the plug and the wire, we're kind of struggling a little bit. So there is clearly a challenge. Dr. Fan, you're a technologist, so you're obviously going to beam up satellites you were discussing the other day, and you're going to solve all of these problems for us. Tell us what you're doing in this space around electrification and where you see the trend going in the future.
Yeah, first of all, really appreciate having me here. Our company, Bernard, we're a geospatial AI company, right now publicly listed in ADX, and we provide a comprehensive portfolio of geospatial AI solutions to enable different government and enterprise clients in multiple sectors, including transportation, environment, meteorology, and smart city. Our strategy on sustainable mobility is definitely around the technology, and we've been continuously innovating and commercializing advanced technology. There are specifically 3 types of technology I want to focus on today, including first one, the space sector, second one, the autonomous driving, and thirdly, digital twin systems. So with the involvement of space technology, really it gives us a new window to monitor our physical planet with additional utilities. For example, through remote sensing satellite, we can effectively monitor the land changes and the air conditions over a large area with a very limited cost. Specifically, on synthetic septual aperture radar satellite, which gives us a more comprehensive coverage of the monitoring capability. No matter it's dark in the evening or cloudy in the sky, we can always have a very good access of the planet. As I mentioned in our call yesterday, last week our company just announced the plan of launching a constellation of 5 synthetic aperture radar satellites starting January next year. So we sort of moved from the downstream data analytics capabilities to more on the upstream side, and we'll keep focusing more on the local production and the capability development. And in addition to the remote sensing satellite, we also building the plan to locally manufacture a HAPS system, which stands for High Altitude Pseudo Satellite, which is solar powered and gives very rapid data access over different areas. On autonomous driving, I want to mention 2 figures. Number one, according to study, autonomous vehicles are on average 20% more effective on the fuel consumption side than traditional vehicles. And secondly, in fact, the current autonomous vehicles around the globe, no matter it's in US, China, Canada, or Europe, more than 55% of the autonomous vehicles are actually electric vehicles. And I believe this figure will keep growing in the coming periods. For our company, we've actually been quite active in this domain. We've been operating together with the Abu Dhabi government, ITC and the DMT, a fleet of 17 autonomous vehicles, including robo-taxis and minibuses. I think especially this type of products, when we discuss about the 15 minutes concept, it's a great concept, to be honest. It's especially from the top-down policy, encouraging people to accept the changes of basically the lifestyle. But the technology will be the foundation. Ultimately, it's about user experience. And the third technology, digital twin, I think other panelists that also mentioned this point. I think having the right data and the right data platform is ultimately very important before we start talking about how to monitoring and tracking, the carbon footprint. With all the different sensors, no matter it's on space, no matter it's on the street, different type of vehicles, all the data will coming to the digital twin platform with the right machine learning and the reasoning algorithm to enable informed decision making. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
Great.
Yeah.
Hala, you were talking yesterday as well about the importance of the digital twin in the design aspects that you're involved in.
Yes, actually, I believe that there should be like a balance between having the roads and infrastructure that allows for pedestrian-friendly and all this micro-mobility, biking and so on, and also at the same time going for high technology, and digital twinning will definitely help in measuring and tracking the performance of the infrastructure and and our roads, and be able also to optimize the model that best fit the city. So by, for example, focusing on traffic management and ITS that would allow us to improve travel time and incentive management and all of this sort. So it's really the balance between the two. So,
Hamad, we're obviously, as we have perhaps over the last sort of, I don't know, decade or more, clearly been at a crossroads around how we do indeed tackle the major issue of climate change, on the planet, and that transportation, generally has been one of those that has contributed quite significantly, certainly in some areas of the world, to those changes in the environment. What do you see as the need to actually really change behavior? I might suggest to me that my daughter, 19, 20, doesn't really actually want to own a car, and I think probably has been generally convinced by a lot of the arguments, perhaps, but those perhaps somewhat more challenged in age might think differently. How do you see us being able to change people's behavior to really make a commitment to helping with the environment?
Yeah. See, the cliche and typical and expected answer is probably education, but I don't see that has lots of weight, to be honest with you. We are all advocate of sustainability here and public transit. Can I ask audience who has, including myself, which I use can I ask if anyone use public transit to come here? We are all advocate of, raise only one person or two people, right? Or no one, no. So I put little weight on education. Then let's see what is important to answer your question. It's design and policies. It's design, because as economists say, people are economic person. That means they want to maximize their profit. If travel time is better on auto, they use auto. There's tragedy of commons, they say, as economists. That means, people tend to deplete the resources if it's for public and it's for free. So two things needed in order to make public transit and behavior change. That's design, the right design, which I alluded to. The right design means, interconnected network, so transit would work, density, and then the mixed use, and from the other hand, policies. Pull them out of the auto, push them into transit by policies. We just had one person, two people public transit. If we were in London or New York, probably it was opposite, because there are public parking fees there are congestion charging. So these are the things. Dubai have been doing a great job in order to reach to that stage, and with the 20-minute city and all the plan that they have, we expect to see more policies and then the design that would actually make that 20-minute city that they have in mind implementable and possible.
Great, thank you. Ange, I think I'll give you the last word before we sort of close down. What do you see as the key challenges for mobility over the next few years?
Plenty. Well, first, it's definitely the behavior. That's one. Two, the design, the policies, all of that is moving in the right direction. It's just, as I said, it's that matter of what's the time frame for people to accept it and actually, commit to it. And again, it's not just about accessibility, it's the other factors like health, carbon emissions, costs, etc., that come into play, people need to be aware of it. And even if I'm going to dig in a little bit, within the planning itself, we need to start thinking about what makes sense rather than just, I'm not talking about the practicality of the infrastructure, but there's the resiliency, there is the future planning, there is the, selecting the right system for the right application. So don't just go wild and, okay, I just want to follow the trend of autonomous vehicles, etc., but just to go to the actual, choosing the correct mode of transportation. And above all, I think what would be a good challenge here is how do we balance vehicular or in whatever format it comes, or auto vehicles or whatever it is, with human elements for us to actually, encourage physical activity rather than our reliance on machine.
I mean, one thing I would just wrap up is just, obviously, we've recovered from the pandemic. What was obviously very interesting about that whole process was how the world did actually generally shut down. And so it's sort of possible. It clearly was done out of a need to protect each other, so to speak. But there was something in that. And I think all of us having experienced that, then I think, we note that there are some possibilities around how we might change. Thank you all. I'm going to hand back over, I think, for a series of questions maybe in response. Thank you.
Absolutely, Roger. First thing I should say is that, unfortunately, because we're running just about an hour late, I so regret having to rush these wonderful panels, because I think that you've raised 3 or 4 really significant points, not least yourself just now, Roger, when you said that in reality, we know we can change our concept of mobility because we did it 2 years ago for 1.5 years, and we know that we can change when we need to change. How can we build, my question is to the panelists, how can we build that radical, innovative, compulsory thinking into our urban planning? Because it's not being built in at the moment. It's as if, when I speak to so many urban engineers and architects, it's as if COVID lockdown never happened. How do we build that sense of urgency and compulsory change into our new mobility models? Would anyone like to grab that question? Because it's such an important point.
All right, so what I have noticed, and you're absolutely right, in a sense that when it comes to, even workspace planning, I'm not even going to go into urban planning but even workspace planning, the response that you, or at least, I've heard it from working with different consultancies and architectural firms out there in master planning, is that to them the solution was you work from home, right? But working from home does not mean that you are not going to move around, that you don't need accessibility, that you don't need to be active, etc. Like there's a lot of other things and elements that factor in, and you need to create that kind of micro environment for that employee that you're sending to work from home. So it's not just sufficient to say, okay, that's it, I've resolved it by that. And this is where the concept of the 15 minutes cities came into play, is that they wanted to create cities or communities, let's say, it's not cities, but actual communities and sub-communities, whereby you have that chance to get everything that you need from that 15 minutes walking distance.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not being implemented correctly, because while we are aiming for us to go with that 15 minutes walk, nobody's designing the 15 minutes walk experience.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
I would also comment that, Dubai, though, has the fastest growing metro in the world at the moment, at 20% year on year. So following the pandemic and the recovery, certain people have seen it as metro as a real advantage. They've moved through economic situation and or whatever, and in fact, we're getting into circumstance that infrastructure is now needing to be sort of replanned in certain areas. Equally, you have the other side of the coin, where someone like Dubai Airports suddenly had a very empty building, now has a very filling building again,
Yeah.
buildings that cost a lot of money to put together. And so there's a balance clearly between the resource that we've developed. And I think to Anja's point earlier with mobility now and plans of the future, I think there's an expectation that we are hoping to plan something with a little bit more rigor and maybe a slightly modified scale downward, but with the ability to flex depending on where we end up going with whatever technology we end up going
I think that's such an important point, Roger, because I think that one of the key factors behind mass transport has always been it's fundamentally pay as you go. Now, because the providers of mass transport are painfully aware of that, they introduce things like travel cards. It's like in the old days with phone cards. You're paying for a service that you haven't used yet. But all of those providers fundamentally know that mass transport is pay as you go. You don't have the CapEx model of investing in a car, the insurance and your regular maintenance. No, it's pay as you go. But that does create a very different demographic, largely speaking, although as you say, we have to be flexible for mass transport. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you see, there are many new business models that have come through. I think there is experimentation, as we say. I think that is going to happen largely in Saudi Arabia around
Absolutely.
Some of what we're discussing. But to Anja's point earlier, we can make certain plans, but behaviour, whether people, and obviously to Vijay's point as well before about the kind of the practicalities of certain implementation. There are quite a number of things in that food chain to look at. Look, historically, next year, the UK will celebrate 200 years of having railways.
Phenomenal, yeah.
Yet, there was a photograph in LinkedIn that's been going around a gentleman that 20 years ago in China stood next to a steam train and now sits next to a high-speed train that can go 5,000 miles an hour and whatever.
Yeah.
In that 20 years, China has moved leaps and bounds to get to where they are now.
Yeah.
And, so here in the Middle East, I think I'm not sure if we're going to go quite in leaps and bounds because we don't quite have the demands here. We'll have a balance that...
Because I think you're right. So sorry to interrupt. Because in that first 20 years, in all mass transport models, for instance, 88% of all of the railway track currently existing in the UK was built within 25 years of the invention of the locomotive. 88% that's there now was built 175 years ago. Because that first 20 years is so powerful and people are so innovated and motivated to build the facility. And thus in China in the modern day, that transition has been a government imperative and thus it has happened. Whether any country can sustain that pace, we'll see. But so sorry, I interrupted you earlier, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said that UK, they're celebrating the 200 years of rail transit. On the other hand, US cities after World War II, mass production of automobile led to mass production of highway. Mass production of highway led to mass production of single-family cookie-cutter residential in the suburbs. And that worked against it. That worked against traffic, emission, energy consumption, space consumption, and all that. So, and then they destroyed actually about 40, 50 years ago all the rail transit and tram that they had, unfortunately, and now they're bringing it back. So it could be the other way around. Again, the same thing. Once we make origin far from destination, you really exacerbate traffic, emission, energy, and all that. And that suburban development, I call it the villain of the urban development. That suburban phenomena really did the damage, taking the destination and origin far from the central city. And that caused by highways, mass production of automobile led to mass production of highways.
Very good point.
And suburbia.
Very good point.
May I add something,
Of course,
please?
yeah.
So, while you were just discussing now on the pay-as-you-go concept, I think, and this is something that has started, I believe, in Europe as well as the UK, if I'm not mistaken, which is for you to actually calculate the carbon footprint of your travel, and you're actually paying the tax for that. So right now, I mean, over here, we don't think of any of that, right? You get into your car, you just, switch it on, drive off,
Yeah,
do
off
wherever
you
you
go.
go.
Yeah.
But similar to organizations who are working, or at least attempting to get to that net zero, and they have to calculate and report their sustainable performance, including, their greenhouse emissions, which includes carbon, etc., which scope 3 transportation is part of it as well. So I think once organizations kind of calculate each individual's employee's footprint come in, and then each making the people aware of the way they are behaving and their carbon footprint from transportation, and then somehow maybe a regulation or something that kind of imposes certain, I wouldn't say taxes, but some kind of, let's say, incentive even, for you to get into that right direction.
That's a very good point. I'll open questions to the floor in just 1 second. Dr. Fan Zhu, while on picking up on Eng's point there, in modern day Shanghai and Beijing, people can get like social privilege points and so on and so on for using transport in certain ways. Is that happening with mass transport at the moment? People being encouraged and rewarded with social benefit schemes and things of that. Is that actually happening at the moment?
Well, first of all, myself been living in UAE for almost 10 years.
There we
I think
are.
I know
There we are.
much
Sorry,
more
yeah.
about the UAE other
Yeah,
than the things
yeah,
going on in
yeah.
China. But of course, we've seen, the high-speed trains. We've seen, different forms of transformation, especially in the transportation and mobility sector.
Yeah.
Right? People are somehow benefiting and they enjoy this type of, new technology. But to be honest, I don't really think it's an apple-to-apple comparison for multiple reasons. Number one, the scale of the city.
Yes.
Number two, even the population, people different, the residents, they have a different preference. And also, I want to touch based on the point you mentioned earlier. I think the key really is around the adoption and really the courage to adopt new technology. According to the pay-as-you-go type of subscription model, right? There could be like a financial risk behind it, right? So ultimately, there will be someone owning the asset, paying for that capex, right? Whether it's the OEM, the supplier, or the operator, or even on the government side, someone will be bearing the capex cost.
Yeah.
But having the courage really to get, we don't know whether this solution or this product will be commercially viable eventually or not, but we see there could have a big chance it can be get successful. And also similar to the things on, in the autonomous driving domain, and I didn't actually mention, we earlier this year also tested hovering bike, X Turismo hovering bike. It's a new concept. It's like a drone. Someone can really ride on the drone. We're working with the National Search and Rescue to test this type of new mobility devices. So before we have all the infrastructure ready, or the regulation, framework ready, if you ask me whether there's a risk behind it, of course there is. But to adopt and really be, have the courage to, bear with the risk, I think that's one important thing. And to be honest, I think the UAE is already performing very well on the front line by doing this.
Very interesting. Yeah. Anyone have any questions for our wonderful panel here, please? Any questions at all?
Thank you. Maybe a question to Vinay, mainly with your experience so far, we have seen a lot of new charging stations for the electric cars, but they may come from different manufacturer, different service provider. How do you see this is going to be uniform in the future, with the payment comes into one direction and then goes into kind of compliance for all the users? Because today it could be different providers which may not be uniformed.
I don't know, maybe 3-4 months ago, there was an article which was announced in Gulf News where they banned there were a couple of Volkswagen ID4s and ID6 which was imported into the country from China because, and they were basically using the Chinese charging ports, which is the GBT standard. So UAE has adopted what everyone else in the world has adopted, which is the CCS2, which is now the combined charging ports, which is available across all the vehicles. So not to do with the hardware itself in terms of the charging equipment itself, most of the chargers, you can say almost 98% of the chargers available and which we have 100% of the chargers which we have installed are all the new standard, which is the CCS2. But then again, you still have a lot of these cars coming in from China because, let's face it, when it comes to EV technology, we are probably 10 years behind China. And what China is doing, there is a study which showed that just one province alone in China has 374,000 charging stations. And in Dubai, I think so, in UAE, I think so we have maybe less than 1,500 charging stations. And these charging stations, again, you have to separate it between home chargers, then you have the level 2 chargers, which is in shopping malls, public areas, and then there is the ultra fast, the level 3 chargers. And when you reach the level 3 charging, the biggest challenge you face is with the availability of power in such locations and the kind of strain it will be put on the grid. So we are all aware of, especially in Dubai, DEWA's push for the solar park. Currently, entire Dubai's electric infrastructure is supported by maybe 15% from the solar park, which they aim to maybe reach 20-25% in the next 3-4 years. So the regulatory bodies are very much aware of this particular need. It's just a matter of, like my colleague over here said, when it comes down to who's going to fund it. So I always tell my clients there always has to be a proper balance between a government and a private partnership. Otherwise, the government is going to put up a lot of regulations, and for a private entity, it also eventually has to make some kind of economic sense. Nobody is going to just put in $5-6 million worth of equipment and not see some kind of return. So to answer your question, yes, we are seeing the hardwares now all follow a particular standard all across the UAE, and now it has to also unify the regulatory, which is in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai. Once they have a standard framework, it makes it much more easier for people like us on the ground to initiate and push forward more projects.
Yeah, maybe the second part of it is related to the software and the platform of payment and that kind of standardization. Because hardware is something, but also the part of the payment and where are the locations of these chargers, where are they available or not available. Because we have seen in other countries, these are kind of an available information, but not yet available here. As you said, if you plan to do any trip, you have to do it in advance, 2-3 days before you do it really with an electric car.
Well,
I mean, in terms of the software, we ourselves, being an ABB partner, we have a payment software which completely takes care of complete contactless charging. You just scan the QR code, you go to the charging station and start your session. But if you download, there is an app called PlugShare. So PlugShare gives you a complete overview of all the charging stations across a particular region. But unfortunately, in the UAE, you can say almost 80% of these locations are privately owned, so they're not accessible to the public. What ADNOC is doing now is brilliant. They're coming out with 70,000 charging stations across their network, which is going to change the way we use the software itself. So they're working on something called a super app where everything can be accessed through a single platform. So if you are an ADNOC customer, in the next couple of years, you will see a completely different app which is only catering to the EV customers. And we also work with...
I'm so terribly sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but regrettably, we do have to wind things down at this point. But if you want to continue the discussion, please feel free to continue outside, because you make a very good point, and I love your answer.
Yeah.
Just that time is a bit of a premium right now. But please, a huge round of applause for our panel.